Just checking whether I am live. Okay, I'm live. Welcome everyone to the first Burning Archive live stream. Just checking that I am live here. Yes, cool. So welcome everyone to the very first Burning Archive live stream. This is a bit of a new venture for me. I've done quite a few recorded videos on the YouTube, and I did one sort of experimental live stream a couple of months ago, but I thought I'd try out doing full-on proper live stream, including interacting with your chat and audience participation, and so I've been advertising this, and the main topic I really want to talk about is the derangement of the American mind, the decline of the American empire. What is going on with America, because it affects everyone in the world, wherever you're watching from, whether you're from America or from Australia like me, or India, Japan, China, Europe, Africa, South America as well. What's going on in America really affects us all. So trying to make sense of what's going on is hard, and I think it's especially hard because there are a lot of not such good ideas out there, I think, really explaining it. There's a torrent of propaganda, including a torrent of propaganda from the American sort of media, and so I think trying to make sense of it's really important. And a couple of weeks back, I published an article in in this journal here, Pearls and Irritations, which is a fabulous online public policy journal. It's run by John Menadue, who's former head of the Prime Minister's Department in Australia, who in the latter part of his life has just sort of dedicated himself to providing a platform for some alternative views on particularly some important foreign policy issues for Australia. Australia's a little bit dominated by, the American perspective on world issues. And in this article here, The Derangement of the American Mind, I did a bit of a flip on the usual arguments. I sort of argued really that yes, America is, in fact, the main threat to world peace, in security and civilizations in the world. So in this stream, what I want to do is have a bit of a look at sorry, I'm just adjusting my streaming technology there. Having a bit of a look at some of the themes in that article, and going into some of the latest news and some of my own thinking since writing the article about some of the key topics in it. So if you are online, why don't you send us a message in the chat? As this is my sort of first live stream, I'm not really expecting there to be a huge number of viewers, but I guess this stream will also be of interest to people who can't view it live. And at the moment in Australia, it's kind of lunchtime on a Tuesday afternoon, and just getting distracted by the chat there. Awesome. Hey, Fish, thanks for the good wishes. And so it's about lunchtime on a Tuesday afternoon. It's about, I think, 7:30 or something, 7:30 early evening in San Francisco. It's, just before midday in Tokyo, about 8 a.m. in New Delhi, after 10:30 p.m., almost Cinderella time out in Washington, D.C. I'm sure Joe Biden's securely asleep by now. And it's very, very early, 3 a.m. in London. And in Moscow, where, of course, they're celebrating today Victory Day, Moscow and the whole of Russia, it is, what is the time in Moscow right now? It's 5:35 a.m. So they'll be preparing the big Victory Day celebrations in Red Square right as we speak. So wherever you're joining from, I hope you get something from this live stream. And the main topics that I'm really happy to answer any questions that you guys might want to have, because I guess one of the benefits of having a small audience in the live stream is that it's easy for me to respond to questions. There's not a wild, crazy, large number of messages in the chat so that I can't follow what's going on. So if you do have a question, pop it in and I'll respond to it. But let me get going across my main sort of points for discussion today. And there's really kind of a few of those. What I really want to focus on is this theme of the derangement of the American mind, what the world needs to do, or what the world needs to understand about what's going on in America to actually cope with the threat posed to world peace and security by America and its ideas about itself. And then I want to kind of look at the nature of the sort of crisis for America at the moment. Some people use this term polycrisis, all sorts of crises happening at the same time, crises in diplomacy, crises in the economy, crises in political leadership, and crises in culture. So the term polycrisis has sometimes been used to describe that. But I want to kind of have a look at three particular aspects of it today. One is around diplomacy. One is the economy, particularly the American highly financialized economy, sometimes described as a FIRE economy, where FIRE stands for finance, insurance, and real estate. And that seems to be hitting, well, maybe a bubble is bursting at the moment. And then finally looking at the whole question of political leadership and culture, why political polarization, why Americans just can't seem to get their government sorted at the moment. So I'm going to follow that plan, aim to go for, I guess, maybe about 60 minutes. We'll just see how I go when I start running out of puff, and also talk about some of the things that I've been reading and writing that also might be of interest to you. And I did, if you haven't already checked out my book from the Burning Archive, Selected Essays and Fragments, I was just having a quick look through that earlier on. And there's a whole bunch of essays in part 7 of the book, Unraveling Empires, which actually go to this whole question of what's happening in America, what's going wrong in America. I've got my essay from July 2016 that in fact predicted Donald Trump would win the election. Donald Trump and America's Wounded Pride. I've got an essay on the unraveling of empires. Reflections on a Multipolar World, The End of History, Revisited from 2017. A couple of essays around all the impeachment sagas of Donald Trump, including one called The Impeachment Curse, An Open Letter to America, and a few others, including reflections on America in Flames. So you can buy that book anywhere from Amazon or Booktopia or Barnes and Noble, wherever you may get your quality books online. And you might be able to look at some of my sort of early thinking around this whole topic of America. Okay, let's keep going then. And first up, I've got two computers running here, and I'm getting confused between the mouse of the different computers. But yeah, first of all, let's talk about this crisis of American derangement. And if I sort of pop over to my article here, the derangement of the American mind, you'll see that there I talk about a whole set of ways in which America seems to be experiencing a crisis. It's experiencing a crisis with its it's a multi-dimensional crisis, and in some ways it's sort of summed up with the idea that America has fled reality. If I can just find the line there, here we are. The derangement of the American mind has gone too far. It has fled reality. If America refuses to accept the modest status of equality in a multipolar world, then America must be defeated. One hopes that America could change through a peaceful political domestic transition, but the historical record suggests that is unlikely. Defeat of America, externally driven change for America, not internally driven change, externally driven change for America for once, rather than America imposing its externally driven change on other countries, may be the only way to end American supremacy, aggression, and exceptionalism. So, just mucking around here with the filters. There we go. And this idea that America has kind of left reality behind in its diplomacy, in its economic policies, in its social policies, in its cultural life, in its intellectual life. This whole idea that it has escaped into the American dream, into American Hollywood fantasy life, is also an idea that is covered in a book by the Portuguese author Bruno Macias. I think it's Macias. Bruno Macias. History has begun, and his book actually is quite an interesting book, and it explores this whole idea that America has let go of reality. And Bruno Macias is also, as you can see here, he's pretty active on Twitter. We won't look at, there he is, Bruno Macias there, and he's written a few books: The Dawn of Eurasia, Belt and Road, History Has Begun, which is the one we're talking about here, from 2020, and Geopolitics for the End Time, which, some of his stuff I'm not totally sold on. He has a Substack like me, and you can join my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. But he's also just tweeted recently, I think, about this whole question of reality in America. If I just find the tweet here, I saw it just earlier today. Maybe I can't find it in time. Here we are. You can read here. So he's tweeted just on the 7th of May, someone should write a book explaining why unreal and surreal have become the highest words of praise in America. Oh wait, I did. Only today I would call it the really unreal. So he sort of explores the idea that America has got so carried away with its ideas of its own American dream, that it has lost touch with reality, that it's vaulted away from a grounded experience in the real life of its own nation and that of other nations, and conducts diplomacy and economic policy, cultural life in a way that is entirely it's sort of like in the metaverse rather than in the real world. Indeed, Bruno Macias's next book is actually, I think, titled Masters of the Metaverse. And it's also a bit of a play on a famous statement made by Karl Rove, who was the kind of political spin doctor of George W. Bush, the younger Bush, in the early 2000s, the George Bush that brought America into war in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think. And although arguably that was done under Jimmy Carter, Karl Rove said that America is now such a hyperpower, such a unipolar superpower, that it can make its own reality. And this is maybe a bit of a statement of hubris, of excessive pride, of getting carried away with what America can really do. I recently saw, what's his name, Judge Napolitano, who does some great interviews with Colonel Douglas McGregor and Alistair Crook and others around the whole Ukraine situation, sort of quoting this idea back by referring to a quip from Ayn Rand, the extreme libertarian who's inspired a large body of American thought. The Ayn Rand once said that you can escape reality, but you cannot escape the consequences of escaping reality. And in a way, I guess, the point of my piece, the Derangement of the American Mind, on John Menadue's Pearls and Irritations, johnmenadue.com.au, maybe? Let me check that. Oh, yes. No, just johnmenadue.com. The point of that piece was to say America can't escape the consequences of its escape from reality, but also neither can the world. The world has to face up to the consequences being created for it by America's flight into this fantasy world that it can maintain the extraordinary privileged advantage position it found itself in 1992 for the rest of time. And I think, in a way, the challenge for us all, whether you're in America, whether you're here, is whether you're in Australia, whether you're in India, whether you're in China, whether you're in Japan, whether you're in Europe, Africa, Latin America, is what are we going to do about America when it's in this state of denial about its decline, in this state of denial about its aggression, in this state of delusion or failure to see the consequences of its escape from reality, not just for it, but for the rest of the world? Something perhaps most recently demonstrated, I guess, by the impact of the economic sanctions campaign against Russia in the Ukraine war, the sanctions from hell that were going to turn the ruble into rubble, but ended up destabilizing the world's financial system, increasing fuel and energy prices in the developing world, making life difficult for billions around the world, not having much economic impact on Russia, which had, kind of built its own resilience, and then in turn self-harming the European and American economies. So I kind of think that, in a sense, the world has to kind of face up to and start to diffuse the threat posed by America. So in the piece, I'd said that the world now needs to stand up to the real bully. The world should no longer appease the real threat to world peace. The world should no longer be afraid of Americans. The world must defeat America. If America I've read that little piece earlier. So I kind of felt that, an international intervention is required, so to speak, into America. Perhaps the United Nations needs to engineer a colour revolution in Washington. And this whole theme of whether America can accept a modest, humble place in a multipolar world was also something I discussed in an earlier video on the channel, Can America Be Multipolar, which was responding to 8 viewer questions answered on the history of America and the United States' role in the multipolar world. And a shout out to one of the followers on the channel, Your Ignorance is Bliss, which is a great name, for asking those great questions. But one of the questions was, one of them was, what was the role played by America in World War II? Has America overglorified itself, which is a very appropriate question to ask today on Victory Day, as the real victors of World War II, but the people who sacrificed 30 million people to defeat Hitler and the Nazis in World War II. That is the Soviet Union. Russia today celebrate that victory. But one of the questions that was asked there was, how can we open up the minds of Americans to a multipolar world? And I guess, in a sense, one of the answers I gave to that was to see its own history as multipolar. American history is as much the product of the intertwining of the history of, Africa and the transatlantic slave trade, which ties together Britain, Africa, the both South and North Americas, the Caribbean, as well as the British colonial heritage, well recognised, never quite transcended, even though America tends to think that, and also critically the Spanish empire's heritage as well. And there's a great book by Felipe Fernandez Armesto that I refer to there, which I think is called Our Side of the Country. Our America, a Hispanic History of America, that kind of makes the point that, you know, the original 13 colonies from 1776 was really just a smallish sort of crescent on the north east sort of kind of corner of America. Florida, California, Texas, New Mexico, all these sort of places. Puerto Rico are actually ultimately or originally Spanish colonies, and the Hispanic history of America is actually quite important to really understanding the warp and weft of the American carpet. So yeah, if you're interested in some of those sort of issues, do check out that video there about can America be multipolar. There are some great questions in there, and it's a bit of a stimulus to a range of thoughts on American history. So the first other theme that I wanted to focus on to sort of draw out some more recent events coming out of my article and the derangement of the American mind, to look at some of this polycrisis, is what's been going on with diplomacy for America. And in the piece from the derangement of the derangement of the American mind, I sort of wrote, as you can see there, that America is out of control in its petulant diplomacy. Its foreign policy think tanks call to remove world leaders. They appear to have sent a drone to assassinate Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. American diplomats insult countries. Its geopolitical strategists try to bypass the United Nations and make plans for every corner of the earth on their grand chessboard, a reference to Zbigniew Brzezinski's grand chessboard sort of geostrategic book from the 1990s. Congressional leaders grandstand with Taiwan, but its president and secretary of state cannot even book a call with China. And they still, it seems, cannot book a call with China. And since I wrote that piece, there have been a series of other, diplomatic bumbles and conflicts, issues for American diplomacy. There was the drone attack on the Kremlin. There has been a major dispute with India over the participation of America in a sort of Pacific Islands forum. Sort of Joe Biden. It's a bit of a complicated story to tell, but basically Joe Biden gate crashed this major event that Prime Minister Modi and a whole Indian business delegation had arranged with Pacific Island leaders in Papua New Guinea, and he sort of insisted that, Joe Biden become centre stage for 3 hours, which sort of threw out the arrangements that Modi had carefully organised. A bit of a diplomatic insult. There has also been a late attempt to sorry, I'm just flipping over to this article. How have I lost it? There's been a late attempt to where is it? Anyhow, the at Indian Punchline, the former Indian diplomat M.K. Bhadrakumar has commented that There's been a late attempt by Jake Sullivan and some of the American diplomats to kind of restore some of the relationship with Saudi Arabia, but in the process they've claimed to do all these things to improve the relationship with Saudi Arabia, and they've just assumed that India is going to play along, but no one bothered to tell India. So America seems to be kind of creating all sorts of difficulties for itself in its relationship with India as well, which is not good. So alienate, Russia, alienate China, alienate India, enslave Europe to its purposes, enslave Australia to its purposes. It's really causing a few ructions in the world. And yet also there is this sort of newly nationalistic, aggressive sort of set of economic national security statements coming out of America. So, for example, there was a major speech by Janet Yellen a short time ago, and about 2 weeks ago, I think. And also, as you can see here, Jake Sullivan made some remarks on renewing American economic leadership at the Brookings Institute. He called for what he called was like a new Washington consensus. He says here that the idea that a new Washington is, where is it? A new Washington consensus of, here we are. This moment demands that we forge a new consensus, and that is why the United States under Joe Biden is pursuing a modern industrial and innovation strategy that will, and here we are, build a fairer, more durable global economic order for the benefit of ourselves and for people everywhere. Don't you worry about that. So there is this sense that America is sort of kind of returning to economic nationalist sort of policies as well. Probably, I'd say, largely for domestic political reasons, but it does seem to be wanting to confront China. I think in one of my podcasts recently, I talked about the economic relationship between China and America through the sort of 1990s, 2000s, 2010s as a kind of there was a growing awareness of kind of mutually assured destruction was the sort of term for the Cold War relationship between Russia, the Soviet Union, and America, where the military conflict under the shadow of nuclear weapons never quite went to open conflict because of the fear of mutually assured destruction. And in a way, for the last 20 or so years, the economic warfare relationship between China and America has had this sort of sense of mutually assured economic destruction. America and China were so economically dependent that historians like Neil Ferguson invented the term Chi-America to describe its sort of almost mutual partnership. But that economic dependency was under this shadow of if we pushed the conflict, if we pushed our pursuit of national interest too far, it could bring the whole house crashing down. America seems, at least for domestic political purposes, wanting to confront that conflict now, and it's a bit of a shuddering thought for the world. And one I think that is, based in all sorts of misperceptions. I recently finished reading the book The Sleepwalkers, How Europe Went to War in 1914. I think it's by Christopher Clark, who is a very distinguished historian, originally Australian, but now based in Britain. And it's one of the best books of the very complicated process of how World War I happened, not out of any kind of cunning plan, not out of any blameworthy intention, but out of a confused morass of interests and fragmented states, conflicting perceptions, conflicting misperceptions of other states' intentions, of other individual diplomats' intentions, and all the rest of it. And we do seem, I think, and I fear, I guess, that at the moment we are in that same kind of world of profound perceptions and misperceptions, and in particular with a leadership class in America who just do not understand their new place in the world, and are committed to a notion derived from the 70s, 80s and 90s of American dominance that is just no longer applicable. But I'll get back into that later. So I might just double check if anyone wants to throw us a question in chat, please do so. But I'll, and as I'm just waiting to see if there are any questions there on the chat. I'm not terribly used to seeing how the chat works, so I'll just keep an eye on it. But if you do have a question in chat, I'm really happy to answer it. But then I might go into the next topic, which is related to this whole question of the derangement of the American mind, the decline of the American empire, the threat to the world posed by this wild, unmanaged beast that has been badly wounded. The next topic is really what's going on with the economy. And back with my derangement of the American mind piece, I wrote that well, I kind of focused here, you can see a little bit on the whole theme of the social crisis in America, the horrible scenes of, what's going on in San Francisco, and, the long-standing failure of America to kind of, establish a proper social welfare system, and to, to establish an economical health system, all that kind of thing. But I also commented that this social crisis that's evident in American streets, in American societies, is likely to get worse if the American financial bubble bursts. American economic commentators are freaking out that the world would dare to dethrone the dollar empire, but the BRICS have overtaken the G7 in global output, and the world is returning to real economies of commodities and products, not fire sales of finance, insurance and real estate. I think there's a kind of international relations legend that maybe even Henry Kissinger once said something along the lines of, some countries might control resources, some countries might control commodities, but the country that controls money controls them all. And I think there's some people who say that the countries of the BRICS have sort of flipped that logic on America in recent times, where they've discovered that, well, money can't buy you love, I guess. Money can't buy you, well, money can buy you oil, but it can't produce oil by itself. It can't produce food by itself. It can't produce semiconductor chips by itself. You actually need to do those things. You need to dig those things up. You need to grow them and all the rest of it. And there is this idea of the fire economy, the economy of finance, insurance, and real estate. And that is the economy that, since I wrote the piece, seems to have, as I was writing the piece, was appearing to have some troubles, and since I wrote the piece has also seemed to have some more troubles. We've had the extraordinary bank collapses of recent times, of Silicon Valley Bank, and I can't remember the other bank that collapsed back in February or whenever it was, but also recently First Republic Bank. I think there's also been doubts about PacWest, a California bank. And I've done a couple of podcasts on these issues over the last couple of weeks. Let me see, I'll just show you them. So I did back on the 31st of March, I did this podcast here, Bank Collapses and Political Crises, Calm or Contagion, where I looked at whether these bank collapses would be a replay of the 2008 financial crisis, what the lessons of history of that financial crisis were, and whether there would be a kind of contagion, not just in the financial system, but into the broader political system. And then the following week, I sort of went all economic historian for a little while and did a podcast on the end of the US dollar empire. And if you're interested in this issue, I really would recommend you check this one out, because it looked at the significant decline in international holdings in the US dollar as the prime reserve currency, and the major decisions of a number of BRICS nations to sort of move trade transactions out of US dollars into yuan and other currencies. And the very interesting story of what exactly is a global reserve currency, and how exactly did America become the global reserve currency. And in making this episode, I sort of learned that story properly, really, and it's often not really how people think. I think often when people talk about, US's privileged status as a global reserve currency, it's a kind of like, it's the coronation of hegemony. It's, the Britain handed down reserve currency status to America back in 1945. And what happened before Britain got it, no one ever really fully kind of explains. But interestingly enough, back in the 1940s, as ahead of the Bretton Woods conference that defined the financial system post World War II, John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist, worked with a number of others to develop a kind of what I think I described in the podcast as a more genuinely multilateral currency system, and his ideas were kiboshed by America, who were determined to give themselves that unique sort of status. And the historian Adam Tooze, who is reasonably active on the old Twitter. You can see him there. Adam Tooze, History Economics Theory from Columbia University, who was born in England but raised in the Federal Republic of Germany. And he's got a website. He has got a fabulous Substack, which is called Chartbook or something like that. There's like a free and a paid version. And he, I think, is probably the best guide to what the hell is going on with the financial crisis and how it might impact America. He's written a whole series of books, one of which I've just read during the week. I'll just sort of flip my screen here. One of which I've read during the week, Adam Tooze, Shutdown, How COVID Shook the World's Economy, which is a great account of what happened over the last couple of years in that unprecedented event. And but he's also written a book called The Deluge, which really describes the changes in the world's financial systems and international relations systems from World War One through to the kind of early 1930s, that sort of set the stage for the conflicts of the 1930s, the conflict of World War Two, and in which America played a much bigger part, particularly through its financial dominance, than is generally understood. And Adam Tooze has also written a book called Crashed, Crashed, which really recounts the various financial crises from 2008 to I think it goes up to about 2015, 2016, 2017, that kind of thing. So there's and he is far and away, I guess, the best informed, the most historically insightful, and the most economically literate and up to date and current with how the actual world's economy and financial system actually works to really understand this. And he also has a great podcast called Ones and Twos, which you can check out. And in the most recent one, he had a really interesting discussion about the growing role of J.P. Morgan in the American financial system. But a couple of the points that he has made is that J.P. Morgan has become an increasingly important player. Joe Biden apparently has an open line to J.P. Morgan in terms of managing the economic and related crises, but also that the American banking system is much less disaggregated than many other countries, so that a significant consolidation of American banking is quite likely on the cards. Which may well create a bit of, storm and noise, although it may not be it may not be a catastrophic outcome for the American economy. But the other thing he commented on is that America only, I think it was 4 of the top 20 of the world's largest banks. A number of the largest banks in the world are actually China. So again, it was a little sign of this shift to a multipolar world. The biggest and best is not always in America anymore. So yeah, and he's had some really interesting discussions. I'm no economist. I don't pretend to be an absolute expert, but I absolutely do sense that Adam Tooze is. And if you're interested in how this crisis of the American empire in its economic and financial system dimensions is going to unfold over the next weeks, the next months, the next years ahead, do follow Adam Tooze. Alrighty, so we are getting up to 50 minutes on the stream now, so do, if you haven't already, give us a like and a subscribe, and whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the subsequently released version of the stream. And let me talk about the third big topic, which is the one about political leadership and culture. And again, in my piece on the derangement of the American mind, what did I say there? I said that America's political comity has imploded. The Biden administration celebrated the Oscar for the film Navalny, which mythologized the Russian opposition leader by arresting its main political rival and presidential candidate, Donald Trump. Now, you know, Donald Trump still has the capacity just to sort of send people off in crazy crazy land. But what I meant by that, I use this word political comity, which is not, it's a slightly uncommon word, but as you can see there, that's defined as polite or friendly behaviour that shows respect, especially in public life. The sort of cross-party comity that characterised past administrations is entirely absent today, and that's, I guess, what we're seeing in America as well. And I could say a whole lot more about all of that. But I think it's more also than political comity. I think there is a widespread perception that the culture and the leadership capability of Americans' elites, not just in politics, but across the board, in culture, society, education, all the rest of it, is failing, is not up to scratch, is, kind of tends to think that they're legends in their own lunchtime, but they simply are not up to that standard. And I guess we see this in different ways. I think I forgot to mention in my discussion of diplomacy a wonderful discussion by a former US ambassador, Chaz Freeman. Here it is, with Professor Glenn Deason, an international relations scholar who's got his own YouTube channel, and Alexander Mercouris from the Duran. You can watch this both on the Duran's YouTube channel, very popular sort of alternative kind of news channel, as well as on Glenn Deason's YouTube channel. And towards the end of that discussion that talked about the New World Order, and this chap, Ambassador Chaz Freeman, actually supported Nixon in the engagement with China and sort of worked through the sort of engagement with Gorbachev and the failed efforts in the early 1990s, the aborted efforts in the early 1990s to bring the former Soviet states into a genuine common security architecture rather than continuing to treat them as the enemy to try to loot them. I think it was called the Partnership for Peace program. He was involved in all that, and one of his comments towards the end of this show is that over the last 30 years, America has ceased to do diplomacy, and it has in fact done what he described as imperial administration. And what's the difference between those two concepts? I guess diplomacy, you actually have to deal with sovereign equals, you have to deal with your enemies, you have to deal with the reality of someone who is going to assert an independent and differing view, who has a capability to act separately to your will, whereas imperial administration is always done under the assumption that the central homeland is dominant, that it is in control. And in a way, I think that same weakness, let's call it, that same weakness of American diplomacy is evident in American political leadership. It's the same problem of escaping from the reality of talking with other people, talking with strangers, talking with friends, talking with people who have a real interest, and engaging in this absurd spectacle of this polarized spectacle of politics. I think I've written a piece on my Substack, jeffrich.substack.com, where I describe it as a kind of a virtual reality state. It doesn't really matter what's going on in the real world. What matters is how we're going to spin it in the news. What is the announcement going to be? What are the panels show? What are the panel shows saying about it? Who's saying what on Twitter about it? Who can we, take off which platform, saying anything that is going to suspend belief in the virtual reality? So I think part of the problem with the derangement of the American mind at the moment, as it's manifested in political leadership and culture, goes back to that idea from Bruno Macias that America has fled reality. It's escaped into a kind of a virtual reality of the political spectacle and is not dealing with the clear facts of the multipolar world before it, the clear facts of the economic stresses and social stresses and cultural decay within its own domain, let alone, trying to determine issues in every corner of the world. The one thing that, and this also is to some degree an issue that comes up in Adam Tooze's book Shutdown, that there is this incapacity of the American political system to deal with real challenges such as COVID. There is this this tendency just to turn it into a virtual reality show. And funnily enough, I was also reading during the week this now reasonably famous book by Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, or Its Emissary, or Their Emissary, Her Emissary, the divided brain and the making of the Western world, which is a kind of an argument from neuroscience or psychiatry and philosophy about the different kind of thinking that goes on in the left hemisphere of the brain, or the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain, which you know, if I were just to simplify a complex argument, the left hemisphere is much more target driven, objective driven, is on the hunt for it's fixated on getting what it wants and working within the single reality of what it wants, whereas the right hand side of the brain is much more relational and intuitive and receptive and responsive to many different kind of things. And towards the end of Master and Emissary, he makes an argument, the Master and her emissary, he makes the argument that his left hemisphere kind of thinking has become more dominant in the culture, and this in a way has created this sort of escape from reality into the left hemisphere's way of thinking of things. Everything is seen in the way that the left hemisphere imagines it or conceives of it. And he describes the increase in the virtuality of life, both in like urbanization and in the internet and television and all that sort of thing. That it's not only America, if you like, but it's the entire Western world, but also large parts of the other parts of the world exposed to some of those same influences potentially, that has seen this kind of virtuality in the rest of the in the rest of the world. But it's particularly, I think, dominant in America, because America has totally bought into the political culture that it is the centre of the universe. They are the masters of the universe. They are the custodians now of Western civilization, and that there is this vast, what I'd call, it's like an ideaplex. All the think tanks and the universities, the media companies, the Netflixes, etc., the TEDx shows, everything that is the YouTube channels that is spewing out all the content from an American point of view that is still blinded, I guess, to seeing the world from a other civilizational point of view. And I think in a way it's all, if you like, sort of jump the shark a little bit into this world of unreality. But that's a bit of a speculative thought. So look, I've been going now for a little bit over an hour. I might just give everyone an opportunity, if they want to, just sort of drop a line in the chat. And while I'm just waiting for you to do that, if you did have any questions, I'm really happy to answer them. I don't know if the chat is kind of working there. Do send us a question if you have. If not, what I might do is just put in a couple of plugs. First of all, for my most recent book, From the Burning Archive, Essays and Fragments 2015 to 2022, which you can buy on Amazon.com. You can also buy it on Booktopia and Barnes and Noble, anywhere there's quality books. You can buy it as both an ebook and as a paperback. And as I said, it's got a whole bunch, as I said towards the start of the stream, it's got a whole bunch of essays there on America, and including an essay on some of which sort of prefigured, I guess, the themes of my piece on the the derangement of the American mind, and there you go. I've got I have one piece there called An Open Letter to America from February 2022, which ends, "It's time to wake up, America. It's time to shed your illusions. It is time to clean your own house. It is time to make America humble again." So that, you might be interested in that. And if you're got more of a poetic bent, you might also like to try my book of poems, Gathering Flowers of the Mind, collected poems 1996 to 2020. And I see thanks for that question, Fish. I'll just be with you in a sec. So you can also get that online. So Fish asks, do you think there are any practical answers to the left brain bias we appear to be sliding into? And which is a great question. And Ian McGilchrist he's got his own YouTube channel, which you can check out. And I've seen a couple of videos with Ian McGilchrist where he has been actually asked that question of, well, what do you do about all this? And in fact, there was also an interview with him on by Freddie Sayers from the Unheard platform, I guess. It's like an online magazine, but they've got a YouTube channel and all that sort of thing, and a podcast. And maybe a month ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, he did a interview with Ian McGilchrist where he talked about his work. It's a really great sort of guide to his work. And one of the questions that was asked was, well, are there any practical solutions to it? And I think one of the things he said was, well, one practical thing you can do is excuse me, sorry, triggered something there that I shouldn't have triggered. Sorry about that. One of the things you can do is like mindfulness, to be in nature, to read poetry, to make yourself receptive to those kind of other ways of perceiving the world, of being part of the world, and also just being attentive to the way in which sometimes we can get carried away with our own, I guess, left brain bias, our own theories about the world, and be a little bit too impatient to see how the world reveals itself. And I think that is a very practical thing also, like just as we're kind of coming to terms with the news every day. I mean, I know I find this myself, that, you know, there's so much happening and it feels like the world's sort of in a crisis, and you almost kind of feel like you want the next big thing to happen so that it all kind of makes sense, but you just have to kind of wait to see how it reveals itself in its messy, complicated reality. So I think things like that, those simple practices of being in nature, practicing, mindful meditation, of being oriented to intuitive music and poetry and nature and different experiences of the world, and just grounding yourself in the world as it is, not as the world as we project it to be or as we experience it through interpretations in books and YouTube channels and in the media. So that's a great question, Fish. So thanks so much for that. All right. Throw in any extra questions if you do have any. But otherwise, let me also just mention that I also have a free weekly newsletter called Glimpses of the Multipolar World, which is on Substack, and you can subscribe to that for free. And hang on, Fish says, thanks, Jeff. I agree. It's easy to be locked into the news cycle and miss the more ephemeral reality around us. Going to art galleries and live music helps a lot. Absolutely. That's a really great point, Fish. I'm glad you've got those things that help you too, because in the end, it's our experience of the world that matters more than, what's going on in this spectacle. The world is going to crumble around us, but we have our own experience of the more immediate world around us, don't we? So yeah, I might kind of close up the screen then, just again with a reminder that you can join my free weekly newsletter at jeffrich.substack.com. It comes out every Saturday morning. I do 7 glimpses of the multipolar world, looking at a common set of things every week, as well as sort of provide a little bit more detail about my podcast, which comes out on a Friday evening, Friday Australian time, the Burning Archive podcast. You can get that on all the major platforms like Spotify and all that sort of thing. And in fact, this Friday, it's episode 100 of the podcast. So I've made it to 100 episodes of the podcast. And I also release that on the YouTube channel every Friday night as well. A big thanks to Fish for joining the live stream and for asking such a great question and having Fish's own good advice as to how to deal with the bizarreness of our virtual world. And thanks to everyone for joining the live stream. I hope I've offered you a little bit of insight into some of my thinking about what's going on with America and what's going on with the multipolar world. My plan is to do these live streams Tuesday lunchtimes weekly, at least for the next couple of weeks. I'm kind of focusing on live streams for the next few weeks because I'm really focusing on finishing my next book, which is going to be called 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. And it's getting very, very close to being finalised. And I will see you all. Thanks again to Fish. And thanks all for watching. Thanks all to all the subscribers. And I will see you again next Tuesday in my next live stream. Okay, bye now, everyone.